Tottenham Hotspur and Roberto De Zerbi are interested in Newcastle midfielder Sandro Tonali. Am I surprised they're interested? No, but would I be surprised if Sandro Tonali were to make the move to Spurs? Yeah, I think I would be. Let's break this down. First of all, Sandro Tonali is a player who's caught the attention of a number of bigger clubs in recent times than Tottenham Hotspur. With all due respect to them, they've had a torrid couple of years, two 17th place finishes. And yes, they won the Europa League, but overall, what they've produced over the last couple of years has just not been good enough. Then there's the price point. Newcastle United are going to demand top dollar for Sandro Tonali. And we know this because some of the other clubs interested, i.e., Arsenal, Manchester United, and Manchester City, have all been reportedly in touch with Newcastle in order to try and gauge at what price they'd allow the Italian to leave. And it sounds like all of those clubs have been shell shocked and staggered, really, by the amount of money that Newcastle have asked for. So if Arsenal can't do it, if Manchester United can't do it, if Manchester City can't do it or won't do it, depending on how you look at it, can Tottenham Hotspur realistically get this deal done? The price point feels like a major sticking point when it comes to the potential of Sandro Tonali leaving Newcastle United. I think given that he suffered that ban as a result of all that stuff that was going on in Italy, and that Newcastle stuck by him, I think he owes them a little bit more loyalty than your average player owes to the average club. So I wonder if Sandro Tonali might think twice about making a move, particularly to a club where there's not a clear jump up, at least straight away. Look, I'm an Arsenal fan, but I think Tottenham Hotspur, bigger picture, are probably a bigger football club than Newcastle United. They're not a club that has its own city in the way that Newcastle does. And so you might not feel that when you walk around the streets of London, because there's Arsenal fans, there's Chelsea fans, West Ham, etc., etc. So many clubs in London. It's not quite the same. But Tottenham are a massive football club with a lot of history. The problem is that it is all history. At this moment in time, Tottenham Hotspur are struggling. And yes, there is optimism and hope that under Roberto De Zerbi, they can get back on the right path and they can grow again and they can become one of the big six again, something that they were labeled as not that long ago. But there's still a lot of work before you can say that Tottenham are back among England's top dogs. As I mentioned, two 17th placed finishes. Yes, a Europa League victory in there as well. But I think bigger picture, even the most ardent of Tottenham fans will feel this, even if they won't admit it. That Europa League victory, it papered over a fair few cracks. Is the project at Tottenham that appealing at this stage? Well, Roberto De Zerbi's come in, and for Sandro Tonali, that might be a big appeal. Italian coach, really good reputation, is likely to do well at Spurs and is likely to improve them based on what we saw under Ange Postecoglou and, of course, Thomas Frank. And if you want to include Igor Tudor's very short stint in there, you can, although I don't think that's fair. But it's just about whether or not you truly believe that Tottenham will get to where it is that they are wanting to get to. Because in the past, we've heard promises of big investment that never came. We've seen Tottenham hold back in the transfer market, even at points where it was clear and obvious to those of us, even looking from the outside in, that they needed to improve in certain areas. That investment never really came. Daniel Levy's left now. And of course, with Daniel Levy gone, the hope was for a lot of Spurs fans that things would improve and they would improve dramatically. That hasn't really been the case. With Roberto De Zerbi at the helm and having more of a say in their transfer business, yeah, you'd be, I think, pretty safe to say that there will be an improvement. But will there be a significant enough of an improvement for Sandro Tonali to decide to go to Tottenham rather than any of the other clubs that are in the mix for him? Now, you could argue that for Sandro Tonali, and Tottenham fans won't like me saying this, to pick Tottenham, it maybe means that some of the interest that we're hearing is real from the likes of Arsenal, Manchester United, Manchester City, is actually not as concrete, not as serious. I don't mean that disrespectfully to Spurs, but that's how people will process that information, I'm sure. But I also think, for Sandro Tonali, maybe the London factor plays a part here. Now, I'm not saying that it should be the defining factor in a decision such as this one, but we do hear a lot of players that come over from abroad feeling as though and saying that it's easier to settle in London than it is to settle up in the Northeast, for example. Nothing wrong with being up there, but the London appeal, it is a real thing, whether people want to accept it or admit it or not. So, yeah, I think that's obviously a factor here. What I would say is that for Tottenham, it's not really the best timing. Like, you look at what's going on in the midfielder market right now. You think about Arsenal being linked with Ayu Buadi, for example, an 18-year-old who's still got a lot to prove, but many people feel he's a really exciting prospect. He's had a 70 plus million pound price tag slapped on him. Elliot Anderson was the subject of a rejected bid from Manchester City to Nottingham Forest worth 120 million pounds. When you look at Newcastle's situation right now and the length still to run on Sandro Tonali's contract, they are going to be looking for money in and around that 80 to 100 million pound mark. And I don't know that I would pay that for Sandro Tonali. More relevant in this conversation than that, I don't know if Tottenham will or can pay that money for Sandro Tonali. So this is where, although the link is there, and although I'm sure Roberto De Zerbi really likes him and would feel he'd be a great addition, I'm not sure that this transfer is necessarily viable. I'm not sure that this transfer is realistic. Sorry to pour cold water on the story for Tottenham supporters, but I would be shocked if A, Tottenham are willing to stump up the cash that Newcastle demand, and B, Sandro Tonali, given his reputation right now, given where his stock is, would pick Tottenham Hotspur in their current state. Maybe 3-4 months into the season, if people see a big improvement at Spurs under Roberto De Zerbi, maybe come the January window and going into next summer, they become a much more appealing prospect. And players will look at them and say, well, they're a big club, big stadium, great facilities, wonderful training ground, and they're moving back in the right direction. I'd quite like to be a part of that. Right now, though, I don't think they can realistically sign the likes of Sandro Tonali, not just financially, but reputationally as well. Does the Roberto De Zerbi factor, the conversations maybe going on behind the scenes between the two Italians, will that make a difference? Will that have an influence? Potentially, but this still feels quite a difficult deal to do for me. Spurs might want to sign Sandro Tonali, but will they? That is the big question. In my heart of hearts, I don't think this is a deal that can or will be done this summer. But Tottenham fans will take encouragement, I think, from the fact that at least they're aiming high again. At least they're looking at the best in class across the Premier League again, rather than going out and rolling the dice on signings that are never going to have the desired impact, that are never going to have the desired effect. Thomas Frank was a victim of that, I think. You know, he came in and maybe he influenced it in some way as well. Maybe his kind of approach at Brentford was something that he thought could translate at Tottenham Hotspur. We'll never know really who was to blame for the really poor group of signings that they brought in going into last season. But let me just say this, Sandro Tonali, if Tottenham can land him, that would be quite the coup. I just don't think at this moment in time it is possible, but we will see. Make sure you leave a like on the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well if you're new. Thank you so much for being here. See you all on the next one.